Hey everybody. You know that I'm a big fan of DC animation in general, and it's been a long while since I've actually done one of these reviews, especially of the direct-to-video animated movies. And so I've returned today so that I can review Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1 and the new release from yesterday, Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 2. Two very different reviews coming for these two movies, even though they're, part one and part two of the same story. Now, because I have not been doing reviews for the Tomorrowverse films over here at Squawcast Media, I can recommend you go over and check out our friends over at Beer with Geeks. A couple of years ago, back when Green Lantern Beware My Power came out, I did a review with their Tim, as many of you long term listeners will know, Earth One Tim, as we call him. And we did a review from Superman Man of Tomorrow all the way to Green Lantern Beware My Power. And you can kind of get my ideas. Overall thoughts, I've not been a giant fan of the Tomorrowverse. Really, the one shining example of the movies for me has been The Long Halloween. It's the one time I felt like the animation style really kicked for these movies. It really worked for the aesthetic of The Long Halloween. Otherwise, you know, I haven't really found much to love about the Tomorrowverse films. So going into this, knowing that they announced that Crisis on Infinite Earths was going to be the end of the continuity, I kind of had the reaction of, okay. You basically did like 7 movies and you're cutting off this continuity after like 14 or 15 movies that you had with that new 52 inspired continuity that I kind of like to refer to as the Road to the Apocalypse War, which I really enjoyed. And once again, if you head on over, in the Patreon archives at Squawcast Media, I did a complete rewatch leading up to Apocalypse War, and I covered every single movie. And that continuity really benefited from watching all of the movies in a very compressed time to see all the connections. I've not felt this way about Tomorrowverse at all. With that being said, I have to say that when Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1 came out and I watched it, it is a really engaging Flash story. It also, while entertaining me and telling a really good emotional story, particularly about Barry and Iris, it frustrated me in the way that the Tomorrowverse movies felt very disjointed in that long chunks of time would happen in between movies. It would seem like things have happened in the universe and we just never got told about. We don't even get told about them. We don't even get to see them. They just happened and we just are supposed to roll with it. Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1, as part of this sort of time hopping story with Barry that's connected to Crisis, fills in some of those gaps that we didn't see in those movies and what was happening in between the movies. And so while that was nice to kind of see, it was also frustrating at the same time because it felt like this Tomorrowverse continuity was never given the proper ability to grow and develop naturally. It just felt kind of slapped together, as it were. So while it was just a weird feeling to watch part one and go, I love the Barry stuff. This is a really engaging story. It's really emotional, great character stuff. I'm loving having these holes filled in for me in between the other Tomorrowverse movies. I just wish this had been told then instead of being told now at the end. So I can very much recommend part one. I was very much entertained by part one. It's a really solid Flash story. Now, that being said, I don't know what part two is. I literally just came downstairs after watching it. And while part one is very clearly it's Flash's story, it's the beginning of the Crisis event, but told through Barry's perspective. I don't know what part two is supposed to be because at times you're like, is this a Kara story? Is this a Psycho Pirate story? Is this a Bat Family story? And it's just all over the place. I mean, the strongest through line and the most engaging through line of the movie is the Psycho Pirate story. And I enjoyed getting to hear his story, see how it connects to Justice Society, World War II. But I question why this movie needed to be almost an hour and a half long, because while it would be hyperbolic to say that nothing happens, it just feels so dragged out. It's like they wanted the Crisis on Infinite Earth story to be a trilogy, and so they just padded out part 2 to make it, you know, an hour and a half, and frankly, it didn't need to be. The moments didn't really pay off. It, it, it I'm really gonna be interested when part 3 comes out and I watch it. Does it feel like part 2 could have just been collapsed into part 3? Part 1 exists the way it needs to be. Don't leave part 1 alone. But I'm going to be really interested to see, why did part 2 need to be the way that it was based on how they go about doing part 3, or could it really have just been a two-parter instead of needing to be a trilogy? So I'm concerned. Like, as much as the New 52 movies had some ups and some downs, more ups than downs actually when you go back and kind of rewatch them, but it ended on a banger with Apocalypse War. And I don't know how Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 3 is going to be. I mean, they're trying to promise so much, and I just don't think they're going to be able to deliver, but that's just how I feel. I mean, I haven't been, like I said, I have not been that excited about the Tomorrowverse. And then they surprised me with part 1, but then part 2 has just felt like, take all the things, all my complaints that I've had about the Tomorrowverse movies that I haven't enjoyed, and then just make an entire movie that feels that way. So we'll see, and I'll come back on here on the channel to talk about part 3 when it gets released, and we'll see how this continuity, wraps itself up. But frankly, this is a series of movies that I'm not going to miss it when it's gone. So I hope you guys appreciate this review. Like and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to try to pop on here as I kind of feel this out and figure out what kind of content I want to provide. But I do know that I wanted to at least wrap up, the sort of my bread and butter, which has been, these direct-to-video animated films that Warner Brothers Animation's been putting out. So thank you guys for watching and listening, and I will talk to you guys later.